Today, we're going to take a brief look at the Polikarpov U-2, later renamed to the Po-2. Now, don't worry, I am well aware this is a tiny video for such a storied aircraft, but this is a new video format I'm experimenting with, or rather, this is a video format that I was meant to be strictly adhering to, but failing miserably. Originally, the plan for these aircraft overview videos was for them to not really go much beyond the 15-minute mark, and many of them recently have, so I'm going to be recommitting to that time limit. These shorter overview videos should allow me to introduce and briefly discuss a topic in general, while keeping up with my upload schedule. And popular overview videos moving forward will go into the running to go into voting pools for a longer deep dive video on the topic in the future. I'm also doing this partly to combat the appalling flood of low-quality, often factually incorrect AI-generated content that is plaguing this platform, as I discussed earlier in my previous video. Now, I hate asking for this sort of thing, but if you do enjoy my videos, please consider liking and subscribing so the algorithm actually promotes this sort of stuff, rather than the disjointed crap that's currently flooding YouTube. And also, please go and support the other genuine creators on this platform as we attempt to cope with the ever-rising tide of AI slop. Anyway, rant over again, back to the Po-2. The Po-2 was a simple biplane trainer aircraft that was produced in the Soviet Union before the Second World War. On the face of it was nothing particularly special. It was designed to be cheap and mass-produced, but its fate was changed by the desperation of war. Following the German invasion in 1941, this humble trainer was thrust onto the front lines, filling numerous roles, but most famously being used as a nighttime harassment bomber of all things. This tiny, slow, underpowered biplane remained a thorn in the side of the German Wehrmacht throughout the war, and it would continue to be used and feared into the jet age and the Korean War. So, let's take a quick look at its unlikely history. Its origins can be traced back to the late 1920s. The Polikarpov Design Bureau was tasked with designing a replacement for the aging U-1, which was a training aircraft that was copied from the British Avro 504K. The first attempt was a disaster, as the restrictive specification had called for identical port and starboard wing halves and all control surfaces being of one common design. Although this was great for mass manufacturing, this made the prototype heavy and far too sluggish. Chief designer Nikolai Polikarpov would then redesign the plane almost completely from scratch. What resulted was a balanced design, still able to be manufactured cheaply, but with good flight performance, reliable equipment, and ease of maintenance. This new version would take its maiden flight on the 7th of January 1928, with famous Soviet test pilot Mikhail Gromov at the controls. The machine suitably impressed Gromov, and what was originally meant to be an aircraft used solely for training would quickly be adapted for a wide range of uses, starting with a crop-dusting agricultural variant, but soon spilling out into ambulances, light transports, and, as we will soon see, eventually a light bomber variant that would see it becoming legendary. The core design was a single-engine, two-seat braced biplane with a 11.4 meter wingspan. Construction was of a pine and birch plywood truss structure, which was wire-strained and coated in fabric. The wings contained no flaps, but the four ailerons gave an impressive roll rate. The aircraft would sit on a fixed brakeless undercarriage, and ground control was given by a controllable wooden tail skid linked to the rudder. The crew would sit in a pair of separate cockpits, both with linked controls. Initially, the Shvetsov M11 5-cylinder air-cooled radial engine would provide power to a two-blade wooden propeller with a continuous power output of 100 horsepower and a maximum output of 110 horsepower. In 1939, this would largely be replaced with the M11D, which gave a maximum output of 125 horsepower. This was not a particularly powerful engine, but it wasn't meant to be. This gave the Trainer U-2 variant a maximum speed of 150 km per hour and a service ceiling of a respectable 3,820 meters. Range was a relatively limited 400 km, but that suited all of its assigned roles. Importantly, it had a slow landing speed of just 65 km per hour, allowing it to easily use short, unimproved airstrips or even moderately large forest clearings. Although initially used as a civil aircraft, the U-2 would find its fame in its wartime service. The initial German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 left the Soviet Air Force crippled, with massive losses of forward units on the first days. As a result, multiple aircraft that had never been intended for the role found themselves thrust onto the front lines, and large numbers of U-2s serving as VVS trainers were no exception. In the first desperate days, these were thrown into combat against impossible odds, often being used in mass attacks in an attempt to slow down the German aerial advance. Interestingly, the U-2 did provide something of a challenge for the Luftwaffe owing to its simple lack of speed, meaning that even when approaching from the rear, a modern monoplane would only have a tiny window to make their attack before overshooting. Even so, losses mounted, and as the German invasion stalled, daytime flights would be largely abandoned. This would give rise to the U-2's hidden strength, nighttime nuisance bombing. The mission profile was right there in the name. The goal was to be an utter nuisance for the German army. The aircraft would take off from camouflaged frontline fields and fly toward forward bases even closer to the front lines. They would mostly work in pairs, where the first aircraft would cut its engine to become effectively silent and lead the attack, dropping ordnance on the sleeping enemies. As the first plane pulled away, the second would approach. Attacking the now illuminated target at a perpendicular angle, the wingman would often target the tracer fire that was coming up from the defenders. They would then return to base, land and repeat the mission, sometimes doing up to 10 sorties per night. For this role, the U-2 was given a token defensive armament of a flexible rifle caliber machine gun for the observer, and a single fixed non-synchronized machine gun fitted to the lower wing. Initially, these would be modified basic Maxim machine guns, but they would be later replaced by the more advanced Shkas. Modifications were also made to allow for up to 8 unguided rockets. Bomb loads would also vary widely throughout the war. Initially, these were just 2 pairs of 32 kilogram bombs. This would then be upgraded to include everything from canisters of improvised firebombs, 30-litre incendiary bags, bomblet dispensers, and even a pair of heavier 120 kilogram bombs. Although a single attack with these weapons would do little damage unless they landed bang on target, the psychological impact was massive. As one Wehrmacht veteran would put it, "These aircraft do not allow us to live. We can neither light a fire in a stove, nor a small campfire outside. The U-2 crews spot them and drop their bombs on them. They find us every time." Many VVS units would use the U-2 throughout the war, but perhaps the most famous was the 588th Regiment, an all-female regiment that exclusively operated the U-2 and were given the nickname of Night Witches by the Germans. Eventually, the U-2 would be renamed the Po-2, dropping the trainer designation letter that it had clearly outgrown, and it would continue to serve all the way into the Korean War, where it would repeat these tactics against US and Allied forces. Despite being an aged biplane in the first major aerial campaigns of the jet age, the Po-2 continued to be a nuisance, and it would become the only biplane to be credited with a documented jet kill, albeit with a bit of conjecture. The story goes that an American F-94B Starfire was lost when it attempted to intercept a Po-2, apparently dropping below its stall speed to do so. Depending on what source you read, it either stalled and crashed, or it collided with the Po-2, but both accounts are rather vague on the details. However, the end result was that the F-94B went down, and over the years, the kill credit, or rather the maneuver kill credit, has been given to the Po-2. In the age of internet memes and war games, this event is often linked to its modern nickname, the OP-2, which means overpowered 2. Considering its humble origins, the Po-2 had a remarkably successful service life. It was a simple aircraft, but one that was truly capable, and it's one of the most famous examples of a machine punching far above its weight. In all, something around 33,000 examples of the Po-2 were manufactured, and production didn't cease until the late 1950s. Now, thanks to this massive production total, a good number of these aircraft survive today. They can be found in museums in Russia, Poland, Hungary, the United States, and even New Zealand, just to name a few, and several of them are even airworthy. Now, if you would like a more thorough deep dive of this little biplane that could, let me know in the comments below. But as always, thank you all so much for watching, and a big thank you of course to the Patreon supporters and YouTube members who help keep the channel going, and of course a big special thank you to our Wing Commander tier supporters, our highest tier members. If you've got any questions, feel free to leave them in the pinned comment below. Now hopefully I'll be able to stick to my promise of keeping shorter videos to a more reasonable length, as this will allow me to actually allocate a bit more time in producing the longer deep dive videos, as those take exponentially more work to produce, and I want to continue producing them on a fairly regular basis because they're my favourite ones to do. Anyway, that is all from me today. As always, thank you all so much for your continued support, and I'll catch you all next time. Goodbye.